Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm glad you all can be here. That weird noise you're hearing is the teapot boiling right next to the speaker of my computer. I just turned it off, so I think it's going to be okay now. So welcome. We are going to talk to you about the work that's been happening originally coming out of an AGU fall meeting now several years ago, and most recently has been transitioned into an RDA working group associated with the ESIP RDA Earth and Space Science interest group. My co-conveners are Leslie Wyborn and Christina Rothenfelder, so I'm very delighted to have them both here. Thanks for waking up, Leslie. Let me get us started. So welcome. I'm going to kick it off by giving you a quick update on where we are with the working group, and just want to check and see. We have, oh, great. Hey, Mark, thanks for coming. We have some folks that definitely have been part of the uh, work that's been happening for complex citations, and then a few of you, actually most of you are actually quite new. So I will take my time going through, and I'm going to pour my pour my tea. Take my time going through and give you all a chance to warm up to the concept and introduce you to a word that we hope is temporary, humorous, but is a placeholder concept for what we're calling a group of citations called a reliquary. So let me hop into, what is the difference? Oh, one's a larger font than the other. Oh, that's cool. So one of the things that we're trying to do is also be more compassionate and understanding towards Indigenous populations. And I live in Boyd's, Maryland. So this is a picture of a lake close by. I don't have to be there right now, but I'm also learning about the Indigenous population of the Netherlands, and it is very different from how the US is. So I don't have enough time to figure that out. So I am going to acknowledge and celebrate the traditional owners of the land where I do live, the Pascoe and the Mehoic people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and future. So thank you for caring for that land and continuing to care for it, and the peoples in the area. Onward. There we go. So what do we have? The situation we've got is you are a prodigious researcher, and you know how to find and analyze and use data sets. And it turns out your data is across multiple data preservation deposits, which means you could potentially be citing 40, 50, 60, 100, 1,000 data, potentially images, maybe audio, definitely physical samples, and the list could potentially get even larger. But yet, when you try to cite that within your peer-reviewed publication, your journal editor goes, "Oh yeah, no, we don't have capacity for that many. We prefer not to, and we're going to direct you to push those that list into the supplementary information where it is lost, not indexed. There's no credit for the use of that data, no matter who was the creator of it. That doesn't happen. All of that is broken." So it is our intention to actually create a more streamlined situation that supports transparency, the indexing, and also provides the attribution where credit can then take place in proper citation for all of those, the usage that supports that research. So, and it could, these data sets could come from different repositories. And we do want this to be part of the scholarly communication infrastructure such that we have persistent identifiers being used. We are being a part of the PID graph. and the licensing acknowledges the entity we're using, as well as the licensing of all of the, in this case, we're doing a collection. So the word children, I'll use the word children that are included in the collection. And the term we have for this is a reliquary. Yes, it's meant to be humorous. It's a precious collection of items, as it is, should you be religious and follow Catholic practices, that's commonly where you can find a reliquary, and others. Um, and so I think I already talked about that last bullet, so I'm going to keep going forward. And if the QR code, which, since we're in a virtual space, QR code is not as exciting, but yes, you can point your phone to it. And that will be a link to the RDA working group where you can sign up to be a member. Onward. So we have 3 example use cases. There are additional use cases, but there's 3 that we've been following through their life cycle. Soon to be adding in physical samples. I think Joan Demeraux is on with us, who's going to help us do that. And the first one being the British Oceanographic Data Center, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Martina Stockhouse, and the Ameriflex and FlexNet, Joan representing that, and Deb recently now retired. Maybe not as recently, since I think that was last year. So I think this is where I could tell you about these. Oh, no, here we go. Okay. So I'm going to start with Ameriflex. Ameriflex is actually one of our simpler use cases, where the data sets, the DOIs are at a particular granularity where it's fairly easy. There's mechanisms within Ameriflex where they generate the DOI to help with that citation across each of the FluxNet. Oh, Joan, was that you? No? Okay. Are you correcting me, Joan? So there's FluxNet towers, there's data sets that are a part of them. And if you're doing an analysis, say, across the West Coast of the US, there's multiple data sets that would go into your research. There's a way for them to gather all of those data citations together, but there's not a way to cite those within a journal. So we would use this reliquary in order to gather all of those citations. We would gather it all together. And if we go to the reliquary draft, I'm not going to do it this second, down at the bottom of this page, you can actually explore what that would look like. It's in a spreadsheet, of course, for simplicity, but this is what it would look like in actual usage. The information that we would put together and deposited into or registered with DataCite, we would be assigned a DOI to it, and then you would cite that reliquary. So this is truly as complex as Ameriflex is. This is actually our simplest use case for the reliquary. So let me scoot along. So the British Oceanographic Data Center, here we have the example is there are multiple sensors that are on a cruise, and they're capturing data over a period of time. And then they're also assigning subsets of that data such that you could actually pull out just a subset of it. So their example is DOIs and subsets for each of the different types of instruments and locations. There's location information. And so maybe you're interested in a particular area within an ocean, and you're pulling all the subsets out of these data sets, and now you want to collect all of that into a reliquary, and their example is that level of complexity. The DOI itself, its subsets, and then gathered together and organized into the reliquary. And their example is at the bottom there, with more detail on that use case. And then lastly, we have the intergovernmental, the IPCC report. oh, for some reason the PCC are falling right out of my head. Right. And what's really important here is we're bringing transparency, and the use case is the most recent report. And what we want to do is provide the information that goes into each of the figures within the report. And this is our most complex use case. So for each of the what Martina did is she took a look at one particular chapter and pulled in all of the data references for the figures within that chapter. And what it demonstrates is that there are quite a variety of types of data that go into those figures. Sometimes it's just a URL, sometimes it's a DOI, sometimes it's actually data within a paper, and she lists all of those within her reliquary example. And the intention here is that you could assign a reliquary to and cite it within each of the chapters of the IPCC report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. There it is. My brain started working. And then we would have a full citation for each of the chapters, which we are delighted, at AGU, we're particularly delighted with all of these examples and the value for each of them in their own right. Moving along. And then additional use cases are coming in. So citing physical samples for and how complex that is. So you can all read these items.
Shelley,
Yeah.
Shelley, I can do the next three if you like, because they're mine.
Yep, go ahead, please. Thanks, Leslie. Go right ahead.
Okay, so hi Joan, this is for you. So it's common with we really have this use case in physical samples where you go out and, as you can see, I've got a batch here where I've collected some pink rocks, some grey rocks, some green rocks. And I've come back from the field. It was a very expensive field trip to Antarctica, cost a fortune to get these samples. And I give each one an IGSN, and the samples go into the repository. I then spend the next couple of years writing some papers where I write one on the pink rocks or one on the green rocks or one on the grey rocks. So I'm making different combinations of these rocks. And so the IGSN for each sample is the same, but the combinations that I put together in the papers is different. And so what I would like to do is give each combination for each paper a reliquary, but still be able to identify each each sample, and in particular making sure, because this was a horribly expensive field trip, the funder is part of what I'm going to do. And so that's kind of, to me, a very common use case for rocks, and it's getting credit for that sampling. Oh, sorry, I can't move it. Kirst, can you move the next? Yeah, okay. Now I'm going to talk about this one in my next set of slides, but again, that's geochemical data, and this problem is starting to really emerge as we do more and more aggregations of data to get that bigger picture. And quite often the aggregation of data is what gets the DOI in the data set, but the individual researchers and the funders don't get any credit. Next one, please. And this is one from geophysics. And this is kind of quite common in geophysics. And what the FDSN has done since 2014, they're probably the first, is assign a unique data site DOI for the seismic network. The description of the network is that it's a collection of the data, including the metadata, stations, instrument types, and response data. And also they ask for other descriptive items. But many of the individual items within it have individual PIDs, but you can see that it's heterogeneous. Like it's not like some of our other use cases where it's an equivalent data set. The components within that data set or reliquary are quite heterogeneous. And the other thing that seismologists are finding as publications want to have a DOI to the data set, they don't like these complex composite DOIs representing a composite heterogeneous data set. And I keep saying that probably the FDSN is one of the earliest reliquaries in identifiers being used to aggregate multiple artifacts. I think that's my three. You can go. Yep, there we are.
All right. So thank you, Leslie, using the use case for the IPCC, we have the reliquary identifier, which we're expecting to be a DOI. We prefer that. Then we have the content. So this is our children. So just examples there, squished up so that they can fit on this on the slide here. And we desire to have any type of persistent identifier URL or other mechanism that would work within a reference section to be included here. It's important to note that within publishing, there is only one persistent identifier, especially in the earth and space sciences, that actually has all of the automated attribution associated with it, and that is the digital object identifier. Other persistent identifiers don't have those mechanisms in place, but they are likely to in the future. And if we're able to include them in the reliquary, and we know that a reliquary was included with a paper, it is possible to go back and correct the linkages later. It's something that Christine is actually working on for our data citations now that we've corrected the automation for those, not automation, but we've enabled it since about a year ago, but she's going back towards older publications to get those linkages built so that the PID graphs will work. And if you want to know more about that, reach out to her. She's very excited to talk about that. So these the data for the IPCC example, the data is included in papers, in data papers, actual data sets and data collections. And some of them actually being handles within a DOI. So granularity within that collection, the specific DOI. And the opportunity to actually have all of the relevant persistent identifiers included within the reliquary. So, let's see. Yep. Okay. Excellent. I'm not going to get too much into those details because we're moving along. So the important element here is that the reliquary does provide credit, but it also gives the reproducibility for the IPCC report. So depending on which stakeholder community we're talking to explain the benefit of a reliquary, sometimes it's both, sometimes it's one or the other. Jonathan, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, hi. The global change information system has supports some of this. I think it's the same use case. So could you just make a connection to that so we understand how this is an international report? It's connected to the national assessment.
Yeah, yeah, that would be an opportunity for us to have for your stakeholders to find value as well, I think is what you're saying. Do you think it's a new use case? Do you think we could set you up with an example?
No, maybe someone else who's worked on this can speak
Okay.
to it, but
Okay.
the GCIS is doing this already in some capacity.
Oh, okay. So maybe there's a example of this already in play. Is it the data site collection DOI that they're using?
No, but
Other
it's strikingly similar because they're citing data that support figures in the National Climate Assessment. So
okay.
the fact, they're trying to do it now on the international stage, they're going to have to implement it in the new system because they can't use GCIS for this, the Global Change Information System. And but it sounds like you're coming at it from a broader perspective, so maybe this will be something GCIS will support in the future.
Oh, great. And Sky, do you have more to add to that? I saw your hand up too.
Yeah, I posted a couple things in the comments about it as well. I mean, it is a different use case. I mean, the approach that the IPCC has taken is different from what the U.S. Global Change Research Program has taken with the GCIS. The GCIS came out in 2012, 2014 or so, and has supported the national climate assessments and other highly influential scientific assessments in the same way as this use case is here in terms of providing full scientific provenance. But it's a different approach, and I think it's worth looking at as one of the use cases. I did get a pointer to your complex citation use cases spreadsheet, so I'll drop something in there as a placeholder for further work.
That's really helpful. Okay, yes, we would want to let them know that we have something that might be more useful. So just important to know that this is not operational yet. So it is a desire to have this as in place. And you're motivating me so then, the next time, perhaps, I don't know how often the GCIS generates a report, but as soon as we can get this ready to go, we know it will improve IPCC. And we're happy to brief anybody at the GCIS to let them know what's been created or include them on the discussion. So that'd be great. Thank you. Thanks for bringing it up. That's perfect. Okay, great. Onward. I'll tell you what, let me hop over this. This gets into a little more detail than utilizing provenance records. Yeah. If Martina were here, I would have her go through it, but I don't feel qualified to jump in and get in too much detail because I'm not going to be able to answer your question. So all right, so here's the entire list. I think Christina, if we don't have a fresh version, Christina has in our chat the links into the reliquary drafts so that you can see what they look like. Any comments you have, like for instance, we can go look at the GCIS and compare and see if there's any, like if this particular draft will meet their needs. That's really critical for us. We really want to include everyone who has this type of need. Because honestly, the conversations we're having with the indexers and the downstream services, they just want one answer. They don't want like VHS and Betamax. And so if everybody can be included, that's brilliant. And it's discipline agnostic. Any discipline at all that does this type of thing, we would want to make sure that they're included. Okay. So goals, the ability to cite a specific reliquary within a peer-reviewed publication or frankly anywhere. Citations of reliquary resources translate into direct citations in the paper and what this means is when you cite a reliquary, it's not the reliquary that's getting the credit, it's the children. And this came up during one of our previous working sessions. And for instance, if you work with astronomy data or the folks at AAS, they actually don't cite their collections because they don't want them to actually get credit, because right now it's the primary DOI, of course, that gets the credit, the attribution, not the children. So they're looking forward to progress on this because they want the children to actually get attribution. and not the primary DOI in this case. So we're working through all of those complexities. The linkage has to be there, but the attribution has to be for the children. So like if you generate a brand new reliquary DOI, you know, the contribution you've made to the scientific record is you actually connected the dots on something that went into your paper. That's, you know, lovely, but not the point. The point is all of the different data, software, and whatever other digital object that you're putting into the reliquary is what receives the attribution to be being part of your paper, the IPCC report or such. Okay. And so moving along, supporting reusability and traceability, transparency, easy for any researcher to create, keeping in mind that these elements the children would come from a single repository or multiple repositories. Again, that says it in that next bullet, and indexed. The children are indexed such that whatever construct of credit is possible. So you're enabling credits to take place, and it could be any type of digital research object. And I cannot see the chat, so if that matters, somebody should say something. Here is the RDA working group. If you have any interest in following along, being updated or participating any level, please do join. It's free to be an RDA member, and we will continue to update ESIP folks and continue to update RDA folks and keep you all involved. And that is the goal. We have our remit. We need to make some significant progress in the next 6 months. So what has been rather quiet during 2023, we will pick up the pace coming into 2024. It is likely we'll be able to proof of concept some of the ideas, and then we will be asking some of the larger pieces, infrastructure pieces for publishing to make some commitments for implementation in 2024. Okay, so the use cases are at the bottom. I think Christine has provided you with all of those links in the
Session
chat.
notes.
Yep,
And
thank you.
chat.
Thank you. And Leslie, I'm happy to advance slides for you.
Shelley, are you holding questions until after Leslie's presentation?
No, I'm perfectly fine doing it now. Should I look at the chat, or do you want to help navigate for me?
Yeah, so Sky, if you want to come off mute, that would be great. Or I can read, there's one specific question I'm not sure we've addressed yet. What's the conceptual gap and capability between the envisioned reliquary and a data site collection record?
We are actively doing the comparison right now. Helena Kusin has volunteered to support our mapping between the two. We'll double check GCIS, but we are prepared to do that mapping right now. We honestly believe we're probably pretty close. The intention would be to use the data site collection DOI.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to keep my hand up, but I'm happy to jump in on that too. Yeah, it sort of relates to my next question. And I mean, Leslie kind of hinted at this a little bit, kind of with the use case of physical samples and that sort of thing, and the need for, say, a reliquary in any given case to be able to say, okay, well, in this case, we use these samples, and this is why we use these samples. This is what we use these samples for. And so it seems like you're probably thinking about sort of more in depth about what the relationship is within a reliquary to the constituent assets that are sort of part of that in some way. So that's what I was getting at. My other question in the chat was sort of about the predicates, you know, that beyond just an arrow, or really what the DOI or the data site collection idea really does. You know, what's the significance of that particular thing that you are including in your reliquary to the thing that the reliquary is for? That's the big piece of missing information that we often have, where we cite something, but we don't really say what we cited from it. You have to kind of take it in context and understand a lot of other things to try to get there. And so it seems like you guys are probably thinking about that. And I was just asking about sort of where that sits in your documentation, so I could go look.
If I'll tell you what, let me stop. Actually, I wonder if I can do this real time. All right. Yeah, let me cross your fingers. This is sort of a working session, so let's see if I can do it. Let me hop back to Deb's use case and let's explore that because
Here, Shelly, I'll drop the link for you in the chat if you can pull that up more easily. It's hard to click those links.
I appreciate you very much, Christina. So yes.
No problem. Here you go.
Thank you. Use case in the reliquary. Okay, I'm going to hop into the reliquary. I think you can all just see my entire desktop, right? Is that true?
Yep.
Okay. Which is dangerous because God knows I've been doing all kinds of things today. All right, I'm gonna make it really big. Okay, so Leslie, is it okay if we just take a little stroll here and then hop back over to your talk? And I think we can continue the stroll as we go.
No, absolutely no problem at all. We want this as a working discussion session.
Okay, so I think in our original thinking, the relationship was not considered. Note the fact that we've got reliquary citations here, the DOI, but nothing to the right. I think there's a real opportunity to leverage the DataCite DOI because I would completely agree with you that there's an opportunity to give more information from the author here, where we can't actually get it in a peer-reviewed publication. So let me walk backwards to make sure everybody's feeling comfortable. So so remember, this is a napkin, right? This is the back of an envelope, a napkin. So this is not anything more than notes. It's not active. We haven't rendered it. It's an idea. So row 2, I don't want to make it, yeah, row 2 has a pretend DataCite collection DOI. We haven't gotten permission from DataCite to be saying that. So in other words, we haven't made that agreement. We haven't agreed that this is going to work yet. So let's just nod that that's probably going to happen. So if that's the wrong format, don't hold us accountable. It's just a placeholder. This is the pretend citation for the reliquary. Actually, Deb actually got it a little wrong here because in APA, it's a bracket, not a, so let me just fix that. She's gonna be horrified that I just fixed that. Here's the description where the relationship could be annotated, but would not be machine actionable. So you could, in fact, describe those relationships here, but I think that would be a mistake because we have an opportunity to make the machine actionable. This would be the recommended data availability statement. And so this is the availability statement. So again, let me make an edit because I'm feeling rowdy. It's not a data availability statement because you all know it could be more than data. It's an availability statement. And she does give a little description. This is not the availability statement for the peer-reviewed publication. It is for the reliquary. It is the reliquary's availability statement, which does make sense. And then the elements are here. And if I remember correctly, she's got like 300, but there's an opportunity, relationship. Yes. So relationship, we could add a relationship here, and then that should align better with the DataCite collection DOI. And we have not done the comparison yet. So I'm taking your word for it that exists, Guy, but you're pretty trustworthy.
Well, no, I don't. I mean, there is the concept of establishing the relationship to the items that are there. And so I do think that needs to be explored in terms of what is the language that goes into that, that is meaningful and traces back to maybe a deeper source of semantic meaning in some way. And so, I mean, and this is kind of where the difference is that we were I think Jonathan and I were both pointing out a little bit with GCIS is that that's actually a graph that has those connections described as to what each contributing asset is really contributing to a scientific finding in some way. And the GCIS doesn't have it perfect yet either. I mean, there's still things that are developing there. But I think to a great extent there, to me, and we've done this a little bit in some of our USGS work, there are often two pieces that need to be there when you're describing those relationships. Some sort of predicate that is, again, leads to a deeper source of definition. So we know what that relationship is. I mean, it's written for humans, but it's structured in the system so that machines can take advantage of it. But then there can also be software that goes along with, or software code that goes along with that particular case. And that software code can also be incredibly important. And it can also be incorporated as linkages, but they're often linkages associated with the data asset that say that this is the code that we use to process that data asset to get the derivative out of it that we used in this particular paper that this reliquary is a part of in some way. So I think those are two really key kind of informational elements that, as you're continuing to probe this, would be really interesting to look at is, that those two pieces, the predicate that describes it, that's useful for lots of purposes, but then also the linkage to software code that actually does the work and did the action that went on in there in some way. So,
All right, yes, I think we should explore that. And I think this is a placeholder because I don't think we've had an actual serious conversation about relationship down here, so I'm not sure this is going to do the trick. But we don't have Deb on the line to clarify. But one of the problems that we run into with the author guidelines for AGU is holding the author accountable for explaining the relationship the data has to, or what's being cited to the paper. And the only place we've ever had to actually encourage that is the availability statement. I'm going to roll up to the top. Is the availability statement. And for those of you who pay attention to the semantic space that Crossref and DataCite and the other DOI objects work in, there's an opportunity to say, was created for, or was somebody else's, and variations. And we had lengthy conversations if we could actually ask authors this question, and went back to multiple conversations with domain repositories saying, how do you ask the author? Because this is, you are the research product, the data research product preservation site. How do you get clarification from the author? Is this, in this case, the relationship is to the grant ID, new to the grant ID, new to the grant, or used by the grant? And just give you context for how, how do we ask a repository when we should be the authoritative source for what's included in the paper, meaning the author is the owner, but we're holding that information as a publisher. And the repositories we talked to said, no, we don't do that. That is something that is just thinking about the fact that data could be collected over multiple grants, multiple papers, and the moment in time is not easy to identify, even for authors, as to when that moment was. So we chose not to require that when you said this is the data DOI that for the data that went into the paper, we do not ask, did you create this new? And is this the first time you're linking it to a research? Or was this created before? Or, are you using it from someone else? We use the PID graph to infer some, not all, of that information. So it's possible we could give this as an optional indicator if the author could do that for the question I raised, but they certainly could do that for the software generated generating the data. This is very interesting.
Shelley, this is Mark.
Hey, Mark. Yeah, go ahead.
I talked to Justin a fair amount at AGU last month, Justin from BODC,
Yeah.
who has funding to start to try and actually implement something. And we talked about this predicate question, and I think he totally, I totally agree with what Sky is saying, that you really need the verbs to make graphs useful. And it's, so really the reliquary itself is a graph, is I think the best way to think about it. And I think Justin is on top of that, and I think in his prototype that he's developing, he's thinking about what those verbs are, and it's actually probably a pretty limited set, derived from things like that.
Okay. All right. We did talk to our use case owners to actually stand up a online version of this envelope. So it was just a few weeks ago that we asked that question. It's good to hear that Justin's made progress. Thank you. That's really helpful. Okay. All right. Let me go find my slides again.
Oh,
Can I
Andrew's got a hand up.
Yeah, I have a potentially heretical question. But
Ooh.
so when we cite papers and count citations, we don't have information on why that paper is being cited. I'm wondering, what do we need about the data objects or data sets in a reliquary? Like, what's the use case for having those explicit relationships? And I apologize, I'm coming a little late into this session, but if it's largely about getting credit for the use of digital objects, do we actually need more complicated relationships other than this was used somehow in a study?
And Andrew, I would add to your question, because I really love it. Why would we burden the author with yet one more thing to figure out?
Yeah, and I think that's really important for adoption of these practices. I'm also talking from the perspective of, like, I've read too much bibliometrics literature, but like, it's well known for people studying those citations that we don't know why something's cited. And to the point that that's a joke, even if someone's complaining about your work, it's still a citation. So
yeah.
Actually, I'd love to respond to that, because Andrea, I think it's a great question. I think it's provocative, not heretical. And it's a great point. I would argue that we actually do know why something was cited, sort of, because we have it in context. In terms of citations to papers, we have, the passage in the document that says, here's what I said in this paper, and you have a citation to one or more references that says, this is what I based this on. So, I mean, when we write natural language processing code and things to try to go through massive sets of papers and make sense of what we have there and make sense of the evidence chain, we're able to use that context to good effect to try to understand what it was out of that paper that was actually used. There's been a fair bit of work to try to make that explicit sometimes, and pull out explicit predicates that have semantics behind them to try to get to what those citations are about in some way. The issue oftentimes with data citation and software citation and citing some of these other things that are not papers intended for human consumption is that we lose the context other than the entire paper. We don't know what it was in that paper that's pointing to, some particular set of data or some subset of data that was processed in some way. And that's part of why I included the statement of sort of an either or on the predicate or the software. It's actually really valuable to have a piece of software, even if it's a throwaway piece of one-time code that was used to process a particular data set for the purpose of a paper. Just to know that that's there, to have access to it, to be able to analyze it, to be able to fit it into other types of analytical pathways using AI and other methods. So that's really all I was getting at. I don't mean to suggest that we, need to have this massive comprehensive thing, but we need to understand at least a little bit of the context for why something was used. Not just so much from the standpoint of citation and citability, but from the standpoint of buildability. Do we have enough information there that we can look at what somebody's done and say, oh, this is something I can go build on and do something else with, or do we have to do a whole bunch of sleuthing to try to figure that out?
Yeah.
Thanks, Guy.
And my gut makes me say that probably that would be optional, just because we know like the spin that an author can get into, and it's not worth it.
Yeah, and well, it sounds like for some of those cases, it might be the instruments can automatically export that sort of relationship for that kind of use case. So I'm satisfied by that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea to say it like that. Okay. All right. I can't see the chat, nor am I seeing any hands. That doesn't mean you don't have them up.
We only have one other comment related in the chat. That's Jonathan again, says that Beth Huther from NASA brought up the idea of citation to data granules plus code in my virtual collections session breakout.
Okay.
No question, just a comment though.
Okay. All right, Jonathan, maybe we'll follow up with you on that to see if there's an opportunity to check that use case as well. Okay. All righty. I think I was there. I think we did this already. And Leslie, are you ready?
Yep. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about is just present this work, some stuff I've been doing in recent weeks, because in Oscope we're setting up a repository for samples, an IGSN repository, and we also want to get the care principles into it. So with that to kick off, I acknowledge and celebrate the traditional owners of the lands on which I come to you from. And today is the Ngunnawal people of Canberra, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. Next. So, what are we trying to do, and why is citation of individual objects so important? Are we just trying to get to the artifact and know that, look, I use this, I use this, I use this? But I think Sky and Jonathan have already stolen my thunder, and I'm terribly sorry I didn't get to your session, Jonathan, but it was 3 a.m. over here for that, and getting up at 5 a.m. for this was, oh, well, come on, Leslie, you've done it. So we want to ensure attribution and recognition to the researcher funder, any contribution of the collection, processing, curation, etc. of the artifact. And so the more I've been doing this work, I'm thinking, oh, it's not just, citation, it's actually being able to get through to the information that is also held in that object once you connect to the DOI. I particularly became aware of it. Next slide, please. For those of you who know me, I'm a geochemist. I'm not really an informatics person. It's my background. And this was a bit of a kerfuffle we had in Australia, where one group had done this compilation of data from 878 samples, and data compilations, aggregations, it's just becoming the norm. And it makes it easier to work on the compilation, to do visualizations, or to provide syntheses. In this example, publication has the DOI and compiles data from 878 samples from 100 publications. The DOIs of the source publications are sometimes stored, but quite often the IGSNs of the individual samples are not stored. And so down in the bottom left, you've got this visualization. Oh, someone's saying they're not seeing the slides. Is that fixed? Okay.
That's just me. I'm going to go out and come back in.
Okay, all right, then just making sure you weren't being left out. So in the bottom right, you've got this visualization, and the online GIS enables the user to subset and draw graphs of the data. But they're only getting the DOI of the publication. So I can find the artifact, but it's impossible for a researcher or the funder who funded that research to know whose data is being made in these compilations. And so that to me is kind of research ethics, that, you know, often we cite people's ideas, but we don't cite their individual data. And so researchers are not being able to know, or funders, when their work is being reused or cited. So the reliquary, as we initially and Shelley said, shows it gets you to actually get back to the objects that were in it. But recently, as I said, I started to work on, you know, the care principles with samples. So next slide, please, Shelley. And I'd really like to thank Erin Robinson for putting me onto this. And this is actually from Manaki Whenua of New Zealand, which is Landcare and Landcare New Zealand. So they hold lots of records of animal and plant specimens. And as they say, no matter what they put on the original data, by the time it gets reprocessed or republished, etc., 3 or 4 times down the track, all the original information is lost. For example, they cite in this video how in a gene bank, even the country information is lost. And so now in the Indigenous case, as you see here, and Sky, this is from GBIF, they're making sure that the local context notices and labels that were on the original data go through as you go into the aggregation. And whereas in other ones, it's just the key information that the data set is built on, so the genomic sequence is all that's in the aggregated data set. And so also there's the point in the FAIR principles that metadata needs to be rich. And to me, I'm arguing it's not of the data set, but we need to have access to rich metadata in the original object. Next. And so what's rich metadata? This is from GoFair. Rich metadata allows a computer to automatically accomplish routine tasks. So again, it's meaning for us to be able to get back to the richer information, which is also, I think, something which Sky and Jonathan have been hinting at within these reliquaries. Next. And so I guess what I'm saying is that initially when we started on this journey for the reliquary, we were thinking more of citation and being very careful to use the word attribution or credit back to the funders. But I think, as Sky's been hinting at, the knowledge graphs will give rich insights into the objects that we are referring to as part of the background to the paper. So again, it's really the semantic technologies that I think are giving us a rationale for why we really need to nail this and actually make it work. Next. So discussion on presentations. So that's just if you want to discuss Shelley's and my talks before you go any further, if anyone else wants to do more on it.
And Leslie, I think we had some really great conversation during our presentations and might actually do that, take some time to do that discussion. And any questions? And potentially not the breakout, because there's probably we're probably at a really good size right now of folks to do that as one group.
This is Jonathan Blythe.
Mhm.
Can I throw out, and I don't know how it maps to the reliquary concept, but giving credit to, I guess, a research project for other published works like journal articles. And in the article, you can give an acknowledgement to a funder. Say this was funded by the NSF grant, so and so on. But there's a uniqueness problem often with publications because you have multiple authors and the authors can be funded by multiple grants. So I don't know if this is an issue that you're tackling in your reliquary, but that gets at a little bit about the complexity of who deserves credit. And you're not able to parse that out. Like, okay, what exactly, which part of this publication did this organization pay for? You do see it in the authors list. You can break out like this person wrote the narrative. This person was the supervisor, so they didn't do any writing. There is that convention with journals, but how do we break out that kind of credit giving, at least in this, I don't know.
Okay. I haven't done this in the reliquary, but I've just completed a project, would you believe, on geophysical data. And that was where we were having aggregated geophysical data sets to be able to do big research on a HPC. And we tackled the issue because the funders were really wanting credit for it. And our funding, we got funding to put the data set together. And so we just listed as a funder the Australian Research Data Commons, and the people who'd gone out and dug the holes and all the data processing said, hey, why are these guys credited here for? Because all they did was, you know, they weren't there. They weren't part of the hard work. All they did was, you know, get the data accessible. And that was where we rapidly came to the conclusion that you needed, I don't know whether you know this new identifier, it's a new kid on the block called RAID, Research Activity Identifier. I can put a link in the chat. And so again, within most metadata schemas, you can have a role which is funder, but what we found was we needed the RAID for the project or the part that the funder contributed to, because as you know, a project can have many grants, a grant can have many projects. And we found by getting this richer metadata on the RAID, which is the activity that was funded, we could then per processing level, as we moved up, have a different set of funders attributed, right? And again, we use the provenance record to say, like, this level 4 was derived from this level 3, this level 2. And we know we're not ready for it yet, but we hope down the track that graph technology will enable you to mine, write down, and get that comprehensive level of detail that you want. But I will reiterate again, putting the funder in or even the researcher was useless unless you use the RAID activity identifier. Is that helpful to you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Point out.
that's like using the provenance model. Activity is a object in that model.
Yeah. And also might be helpful to know that the work that's happening across all the federal agencies, there's an intention for the grant IDs to be persistent identifiers in 2025 or near there. So right now they're actually not persistent identifiers. You can put them in, but the ability to be machine actionable is limited. And they're it probably it's probably worth all of us promoting across our communities that all researchers should be really clear what the grant IDs are and make sure they're in. We probably could figure this out rather readily. Oh, thanks, Guy. Rather readily, but not every publication will always have the grant IDs. It should. For clarity, they're not a required element because not every paper actually has grants associated with it. Some folks don't. Raleigh, I know you've thought about this quite a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for this interesting discussion. So first, just a specific point on the grant IDs. I think that's, the Nelson memo is actually a two-phase implementation. And I think that the part with regard to persistent identifiers is primarily the phase 2. So that's kind of a initial plan end of 2024 in place by end of 2026 or 2027. So just a clarification that that's a little bit longer term. I guess just with regard to this point about recognition, is kind of just like a big picture question. For a long time, there's been this recognition that looking at publications, review papers tend to get cited disproportionately relative to the underlying papers that are, under consideration when that review is being done. And there's the concern that the person who conducted the review, I mean, they performed intellectual work, but they get a disproportionate number of citations relative to those constituent parts that were cited in that review article. But theoretically, one could mine that well-established cross-ref network of publication citations to identify some semblance of what was the relative contributions of these intellectual components. And I wonder, maybe that type of analysis has been done, but I'm curious if there are lessons that can be learned from, these types of complex citations that already exist for publications that, those lessons learned could be drawn over to, I know data is not the same as publications, but, maybe there's something we can learn from that.
Good question. We can certainly go back and ask and check in with the bibliometricians and see if there's opportunity there. Christina's on, and I'm going to highlight something that she's been working on. To this day, there's only been one publication that I'm aware of that took a look at papers, peer-reviewed publications that cited data, and if there was what the sort of impact that could be, potential impact on increasing or having an effect on the number of citations of your peer-reviewed publication. And Ian Hevreskowitz from PLOS had done one on a fairly small sample set, but it was an increase, potentially up to, I don't have the number in my head, but 20 or 25%. And have I given you enough time, Christine, to get the numbers in your head? But Christina's been working on the impact that we have here at AGU. And do you want to jump in now, or should I keep vamping?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, I've been looking a lot at data citation because one of our concerns at AGU is that we're asking authors to do data and software citation. We think it benefits science as a whole, but for an individual author, it's a lot of work. It's a big barrier to do it right. And to really enable reuse and transparency is a lot of effort, which is something we hear a lot. So one of our use cases for them is that they'll get credit for their work. So if they have created a data set and they cite their data set in their paper, if it's reused, they'll eventually get that credit network. For that to work, data citation has to work in the system that we've currently set up, where peer-reviewed papers and data sets with DOIs are what's weighted. And that's really difficult because a lot of data set citations are not really being tracked, whether because of issues on the publisher side or issues elsewhere in the system. The analysis that I did for AGU papers, so again, because we've only been requiring data set and software citations for a few years, the sample size is somewhat limited. But we have seen, this is what Shelley is talking about, something analogous to what's been studied for PLOS articles, that if you cite your data in your article itself will get more citations. So this is not necessarily data set to data set citation or reuse of a data set. It's just saying, okay, your science is more reproducible, it's more transparent. That means that your work is higher quality, and we think that's why that they're getting more citations. And the effect is on the order of, depending on the journal, sometimes as much as like 5 to 10 times as many citations. But again, we're working off a really small sample size because AGU Publications publishes like 8,000 articles a year. And, there might be some bias there because if someone is willing and has the resources to go through and do all the effort to truly make their science transparent and reproducible, and to share good data and to share good software that's documented, etc., they probably have the resources to do high impact science in other ways. So there's a definite bias there. Shelley, is that what you wanted?
It is, and I'll give a lilt up. We can officially say that if you cite your data, you have a higher probability that your paper will be cited. So
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's put a big happy smile on that. There is, but the work that Christina's been putting in, she's been uncovering all of these other insights into what the challenges are, what journals should look for, across the board, and it's just been really important because it's adjusted how we talk about things. And Andrea's calling out the situation where we identified across all the disciplines how data citations were broken. That's not the point of this session, but I'll put the link into the Nature paper that explains that.
I think it's relevant though, which is why I think that's good to share.
Oh, Andrea, do you want to do? I don't want to be a hype woman for myself, so if you want to do
I
it.
just dropped a link to your scientific data paper in the chat, Shelley.
Okay. So this actually, Raleigh, you can take some credit for this. It was from an NSF grant. We focused on AGU's data citations for the purpose of actually fixing our situation and then sharing with as many people as we can what we learned. And part of doing that was discovering that a third-party provider that Wiley uses, and so does most of the other publishers, no matter what discipline, they had implemented an early version, incorrect version of the XML necessary for the automated attribution to take place downstream. They fixed their code. There's a bar. I can do a dramatic reading for you. All of the bad words that were said to get this to happen. They fixed their code in May of 2022. And so all of AGU citations, the floodgates opened, all of our citations started coming through. So if you go back and look at a published paper where you had a data citation in 2021 or whatever, and you complain to me that it's not working, yep, that's right. It wasn't. 0 data citations made it through. 0. I mean, it was so bad. Also true for most other journals. 0. So Christina's actually going back through our publications to fix those links, which is hard. It's actually really hard to do that. So she's doing a lot of quality checks to make sure we get it right. But we'll let everyone know so that there'll be an over-the-top flood moment for the corrections.
Well, we hope so. But so I have a poster talking a little bit about the work that we've been doing at AGU, and the research showcase is a shameless shout out there. But one of the things that we see as a publisher, and acknowledging that we have not been requiring data and software citations for that long, and the culture change with our researchers is significant. But we look at a variety of different metrics for how authors are sharing data and software. And there's big gaps between authors who we think have a data set in their paper because they've mentioned something in a data availability statement, and authors who have actually cited it. So knowing that there's an uptake challenge there for authors to realize that a data set or a software citation is important. And there's also big gaps between the number of papers that we at AGU believe should eventually have a DOI for a data set and existing databases out there. So we've looked at Crossref, and we've looked at chorus reports as well to try to look at what the gap might be between these, dark data sets that are not really connected in the scholarly infrastructure right now.
Christina, which you were looking at reference managers.
Yeah, so I'll also give a shout out for a second poster that Natalie Rea and I have been working on, which is one of the challenges for us as a publisher is that we need authors to format their citation correctly in order for that citation and that DOI to make it into, for example, the Crossref metadata and be able to be tracked easily. One thing that Natalie and I have been working on is looking at the tools that authors have at their disposal to correctly format data and software citations. And a lot of some repositories are missing, for example, .bib export for citations for the data sets they have in their repositories. And a lot of repositories, including Zenodo and Figshare, don't always accurately put out an APA formatted citation. This is a challenge that's pretty universal across publishers, that we need a citation formatted pretty specifically in order to make sure that it gets into the Crossref metadata. Moreover, yeah, Natalie's put a link in the chat to that poster. Moreover, we've found that a lot of automated reference manager tools that authors might be using to write their papers, so we're talking EndNote here, we're talking Zotero, are not, and we're talking Mendeley. I think Mendeley has a plugin for Word, for example. These are just formatting garbage for data and software citations. This is a really big challenge for us, because especially when we start talking about citing large numbers of data sets, large numbers of software, we don't want to be going to authors and telling them, okay, these are all bad, and you need to go in by hand and fix your Word document and update those citations. And then maybe in the next version of the Word document, they all get messed up again. Natalie, did you want to jump in? Did I miss anything?
No, I think you covered it. Yeah, we're eager to talk to people about this work, so come to the research showcase later.
Bruce, patience, man. You win. Gold star. Go for it.
No worries. I was going to make the comment in reference primarily to the grant identifiers, but I think it's also, it generalizes into anything where we expect a user to type something. So we have to collect grant identifiers when people are submitting data to us, so we can determine whether or not it's data that we're authorized to publish, whether it's within our remit. And we find about 1 in 20, 1 in 25 submissions are wrong in some form or another, invalid number, wrong grant number. And it ties back to other things I've done in the past where I've seen similar sorts of error rates when we ask people to retype something. How often do we screw up typing a phone number when we're trying to read it off the screen? So I guess and that is the big point, which is whatever we're doing, it needs to be simple and not rely on the user to have to copy information and automate.
Raleigh, I'm looking at the paper that you suggested. Thank you, Bruce. I'm looking at the paper that you shared, and having just published in Nature, I can assure you that I don't know how they got that many references in here. Nature just doesn't do that. So this will be real, and they've been paying attention to our work. So I'll talk to the editors and find out what they did. I'm sure they'll say, oh, they paid extra for this. Oh, that would be awful, wouldn't it? That would be just not okay. I don't know that. I made that up. I'll find out though.
Yeah, I thought maybe the online version was different than the print version, but I just downloaded the PDF. It's 37 pages long.
Wow.
Most of which are citations.
Well, and this is it, right? Like this is a evidence of our research and the amount of data that it does take. And yes, you all are experts, and you can talk to me about granularity, and I'm here at the fair, the road to fair, with the fair authors, and they're talking about nano publications, and they could easily have 1,000 of them. So our ability to actually create pieces of information at a small level, and that's valuable to us. Think bird sightings, right? Like that's one of the use cases. Or we have Deborah Drucker's here, and she's talking about, she uses the same nano publication for soil and agriculture and biodiversity sightings. Observations. So they're coming down to like a data point, but it makes sense, like in those contexts. And then how do you cite that and not have 47 pages, or I'm sorry, whatever that was, Raleigh, or it is 47 pages or 100 pages, or who cares? because you kept it digital and Leslie, we are at quarter to the hour. Would you like to help us wrap up? Oh.
No, not really. I mean, sorry. Do we want to continue the discussion? We had planned a breakout, but I think that's pretty pointless now. Christine, I don't know how you feel, but look, I think this has been incredibly useful. I feel as if we've done a bit of what we call scope creep. But I guess I wanted to come back to maybe Shelley, we have to finish this working group. I think the clock's ticking at 6 months. Maybe
Yeah.
from this audience, because you've given us scope creep, right? We can't cope. So what do we need to do to finish the working group? What we had planned was a few hackathons online. So I don't know whether Joan's still here, but Joan was wanting to do something with the eye samples group it's not the eye samples, the samples cluster within ESIP, and maybe bringing the eye samples group to try and get a proper reliquary done for that. So maybe what we should do is finish off this working group. And as Shelley noted, we're definitely looking at the data site collection to see what that offers. But we're also extremely mindful of we cannot see in other identifier systems the same richness and the same potential. And certainly I'm going to speak for Australia. If you start saying use data site DOI, then you get, oh, but that costs money and I'm a researcher, I can't afford it. My organization's not a member of DataCite. So although we may get something out of DataCite, it's not going to be universal. And then maybe as a follow on, we explore this richness into graphs that Jonathan and Sky are talking about. I don't know how anyone else feels about that as a plan.
That does make sense. We do that. Yep, that's it. That's the co-chairs for the working group have, as you know, Leslie, are laying out the schedule for the upcoming hackathon. So we'll make sure. So please, if you want to follow, even if you don't want to participate, you just want to know the latest. Please do just join the RDA working group members list. You don't have to do anything, you just get the information. And so wherever you want to jump in, if you want to do review cycles or you just want to be able to keep your own community informed, that is absolutely wonderful. But that's the best way for us to keep everybody coordinated. And we will put out a schedule for the next steps. I've gone back through the last few meetings with all of our action items. There are a few of those still hanging out there. Like for instance, the conversation earlier on that Sky was helping to answer, having to do with why is a citation within a reference? So journals do have criteria for why they are there, and sadly, some of them don't always make sense. But the whole point is that you are being concise with your research, and that everything in your publication has an in-text citation to the reference section, including your data. So we do in-text citations to your data set such that there are linkages and it's easy to hop from that citation. The availability statement has the citation, in-text citation, and then it lands in the reference section for the data set. So what is the best adoption for citing the child of a reliquary? It's not unlike the chapter of a book. So imagine that we probably already have a path we can walk for that. And other types of fun things that we discussed. So thank you everyone for coming. Any last questions? Any chit chat, any catch up? We've got 9 minutes. You can enjoy talking to each other. It's good to see everyone. food
Thank
in the
you for
Netherlands
pulling this
is not that
together.
good. Oh, Andrea, thank
Oh.
you.
Yeah, it was a good session.
Bye, Raleigh.
Riley's got his hand up.
I feel like he's waving.
That was just me waving goodbye.
Ah. Okay. All right.
can
Thanks
tell
for
you,
coming,
Kelly,
everyone.
Kelly.
AI recognizes waving.
good care,
now,
everyone.
and
Thanks,
Have you got
Bruce.
the chat? Someone got the chat?
I'll get it,
Uh,
Leslie.
We'll get the chat for you, don't worry.
Thanks,
Great.
Susan.
Thank you, Aesop.